Hi, my name is Charlotte Halverson, and I work with the AgriSafe Network. This program is one of several segments that are directed towards students who live and work around agriculture. And this particular one talks about protective equipment and why it is so important. And we call the program Cover Up Head to Toe. So let's start with respiratory issues and why they're so important. Respiratory protection is important to you and to those that you work with and your family members, because in your agricultural environment, a lot of the dust particles you're exposed to are really, really tiny. And this diagram shows a picture of a hair follicle. That's a big, long gray string or shaft. And that happens to be about 10, what we call 10 microns in size. And the dust particles that you're exposed to on the farm oftentimes are much smaller than that. So if you can think of something tinier than one hair, that's the size of dust particle that we are concerned about and we're talking about in this program. We'll find these dust particles in a lot of places in agriculture. One of the areas is confined spaces. Here's a picture of a hog confinement building that we see in several parts of our country. And those particles of dust include things like grain, but on that grain are things like animal manure, ammonia, insect parts, and some bacteria, and they can make you very ill very quickly. That's what causes a lot of that initial coughing and sneezing sometimes that you experience. Those types of grain particles are also found outside, not just in confined spaces. And a good example of that is harvest season, when you're out harvesting corn, soybeans, any kind of crop like that. And there's a lot of this dust in the air. And this picture from OSHA gives you an idea of how thick that dust can be. And sometimes it isn't light dust. It can be very dark and smoky looking. And that has a huge impact on your ability to breathe comfortably. Outdoor livestock and feeding and bedding also can be sources of respiratory problems for you. An example would be outdoor feeding of animals, animals that are grazing. Also, we have issues in a lot of our communities for when we bust up these big hay bales that you often see out in the field, and sometimes it's cornstalk bales. When you open those up, there's a lot of dust and sometimes mold comes out of these. And you may have experienced seeing kind of that haze, almost that green haze come out of these bales. That's mold, and that is an organic dust exposure that can cause a lot of respiratory problems for folks of any age. And when you develop these respiratory problems, they often become chronic, and then you have to deal with them the rest of your life. These are some examples of the type of respiratory protection that work well in agricultural environments. On these pictures, you'll see some that they look like they're made out of paper. They are a substance similar to that, but they're thicker. They have 2 straps on them. You always want a minimum of 2 straps on any respiratory protection. You'll also see some respirators with cartridges on them, or what we call pancake filters, those pink ones on the top. Or people that have a lot of respiratory problems or have a hard time wearing respirators for any reason, oftentimes will go with what we call a unit similar to this Airstream helmet in the bottom that has an outside power source on it that you wear in a belt. Some of the things to look for when you're looking for proper respiratory protection include, where you see the little arrow, it points to that little tab on the front of that respirator. You can't really read it there, but what that tells you is a lot of information. It tells you that it's approved by NIOSH, by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. And those numbers will also tell you exactly what it will protect against, the type of protection that is available with that particular respirator. And some of the things you'd want to look for in respiratory protection include, first of all, letters. It should have an N, an R, or a P on it, and that will tell you if it is used, if you can use it with oil, Oftentimes in agriculture in particular, you'll have a lot of substances that have an aerosol, that have an oil base to them. Some of your cleaning products, sometimes some of your chemicals, sometimes the things that we put on seeds to keep the dust down have an oil component to it. So although an N on a respirator is very good and it means you have a lot of protection, the N means that they're not so good when it comes to oil mist and oil protection. For that, you need something that has an R or a P on it. The other thing to look for in these particular respirators is a set of numbers to go along with that letter. And the numbers will be a 95, 99, or 100. And that tells you how efficient that filter is. Much of agriculture does really well with an N and a 95 on the respirator. But again, there are some instances when that just isn't enough, it just doesn't work. And the oil would be an example of that. So 100 on there would almost be like a HEPA filter. You're probably familiar with that term. At home, you have vacuum cleaners that have HEPA filters on them sometimes, air filters on your furnaces. That's the type of protection that 100 is. So if you have a P and a 100, you have the highest level of protection that we can make available for you. This is another picture of some of the common two-strap disposable respirators or filtering face pieces that we also call them. And as you can tell on here, there's information on these respirators. The blue one in the middle, the information happens to be on the strap, but on each face piece, on each mask, on each respirator, there has to be the information, the type of protection that's on there. But the bottom line is it always has to have two straps on it. If it has one strap, it is not sufficient protection. This slide talks a little bit about that. If you see in the picture, the young lady has a mask on. It has one strap on it. And if you look closely, you can see a lot of areas where it doesn't seal well to her face. And you can also tell by looking at that it's a much thinner material. And when you purchase these respirators, if you go look at them in the store, wherever you would, in your community where you buy these things, it will tell you on the box, and if it has a one-strap respirator, the box will tell you that it offers relief from irritating pollen and cut grass and such, but it has no protection against anything that has a toxic airborne particulate. And much of the dust in agriculture is exactly that, toxic airborne particulates. You will see on the box also that it says ISO does not certify products, that it's done by outside certifying bodies. That means that the International Standard Organization will certify the building where things are made, but it does not put a stamp of approval on that particular type of material or that particular object that you might be considering purchasing. So make sure that when you get your respiratory protection, that it has two straps on it, and everything that has a NIOSH, NIOSH on it will have that two-strap minimum. One of the other things that we want to talk a little bit about is hearing protection. We know that in agriculture you have a lot of exposure to a lot of different noises, and sometimes for extended periods of time. We need to look at the definition of what sound actually is to understand what hearing protection really means and what it entails. Sound is measured in units, units that are called decibels, and you'll see it written as a dB, usually in parentheses. The higher the decibel, the dB level, the louder the noise. And continual exposure to these noise levels, if they're over 85 decibels, can cause permanent damage to your hearing. When you look at hearing protection in the store to purchase, whether it be earmuffs or earplugs, they will have a measurement on there called an NRR, or a noise reduction rating. And that measures how effective the hearing protection is. and how efficient it is at reducing noise exposures. Hearing protection devices have these labels on there to guide you as to how much hearing protection you need. For instance, it may say NRR 28 or NRR 32. One of the things that we do talk about when we talk about these numbers is that the NRR rating on the package was done in a very controlled environment. It was done in a situation where everything was done just perfectly. So for practical purposes, when you look at that NRR rating, figure that you're really only getting a little more than half of that. But if you take half of 30 and you have 15, you're still getting a fair amount of protection, and it's protecting you against that 85 decibel level or higher. So if you're exposed to 90 decibels and you can knock out 15 of that, you're bringing that number down to where it's below 85, and that's what we're looking for. We know in agriculture that very, very rarely are your exposures for a set 8-hour period, and during that 8-hour period, your noise exposures may change. So when organizations like NIOSH and OSHA talk about 8-hour periods, we know that that really is difficult to measure in agriculture. So it's really important that you know what you're purchasing and what you're looking at when you look at hearing protection. What we're really concerned about when we're talking about hearing protection is the inner ear and where all the damage can take place. And where the action really takes place is on a part of your ear called the cochlea. And if you've taken science classes in biology, you know that the ear is put together with several parts to it. The part that we're talking about today, that cochlea, is that one that looks like a snail where you see your little green arrow. And the cochlea looks like this when it's healthy. A healthy cochlea has all those little hair cells you see down in the bottom and the curve there. They're standing up straight. Those are what cochlea pieces are supposed to look like. A damaged cochlea will look like this. You can see some of those hair cells are totally gone, and they don't come back. Once they're gone, they're gone. It's like walking across grass. If you go across it once, it pops back up again. 2 or 3 times, it'll come back up. But if you walk across it every day, several times, pretty soon it wears down to just a dirt path, and there's nothing to come back up. So that's the same thing with the cochlea in your ear. And those are the pieces that transmit the sound. Those are the pieces, those hair cells move back and forth. That's what moves sound back and forth so you can hear properly. So the cochlea is what we want to protect. These are some of the common noise levels that we see in agriculture, and the line that goes straight up and down that says 85, that's where we're talking about that 85 decibels. So you can see that there's an awful lot in agriculture that goes significantly over that. So these are the things that you want to be sure you're protecting your ears and protecting your ability to hear for the rest of your life for. These are some pictures of some of the things that we've talked about. And when somebody will say to you, well, what do you think is the best choice for hearing protection? The answer is the one that you wear correctly, and you wear it when you need to have hearing protection. So these pictures show a variety of ear plugs that you can put in your ear. You squeeze them down and turn them and put them in so they seal out that high level of noise. A lot of people like ear muffs because they're easier to take on and take off. That's often the choice that a lot of folks like to use. And then they have down on the bottom the little bands that you can wear either over your head or around your neck or under your chin. Some people like those. So there's a variety of things out there. And again, the message is that the best choice is the one that is worn correctly when it is needed. This is a picture of a hearing protection that is put in correctly. And this one has the little stamen on the end, a little stem that you can help put that in your ear with and turn, and a lot of people like that. They think that that is the easiest kind to use, but it doesn't work for everybody. One of the other things that people will ask about is, well, if I wear earmuffs over my earplugs, won't that give me twice the protection? And the answer is no, it does not. It does add some protection. It will add 5 at the most 10 decibels of protection, and sometimes that's a good thing, but it does not double. So you need to be aware of the fact that earmuffs are not going to give you twice the amount of protection. So whatever you wear, make sure that it fits properly. Eye protection is another thing that we talk about when we talk about the need to take care of ourselves with protective equipment on the farm. And safety glasses, safety goggles are some of those things that we need to have available. There's a thing called an ANSI standard that measures how safe goggles and glasses are when they are called safety glasses or safety goggles. And again, there is a number. It'll probably say Z87.1. And so when you're purchasing equipment for eye safety, make sure that you see that on there, that ANSI Z87.1. That means that it is meant as a safety protection device. And as you can see, there are different types of protection. Safety glasses come with clear lenses, or they can come with darkened lenses, so they work also as sunglasses. Your safety goggles will come with a heavier strap around the back, and they will seal more tightly on your face and cover a larger area. There are some safety goggles that are made to fit easily over glasses if you wear glasses, like a lot of us do. If you are purchasing safety glasses that have the tinted lens, you'll also want to make sure that the box or the package reads that it blocks out UVA and UVB light. And we want it to block out almost 100% of that light. So look for that information on the box also, because UVA and UVB exposure can cause early eye damage, like early cataracts, and we would like for you to avoid that if at all possible. So read your packages and know what you're looking for. These are some brochures that were put out from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They are free to purchase. You have to download them off your computer, but it gives you a lot of information about hearing protection and how to make it work for you in your agricultural environment. We'll talk very briefly about chemical and pesticide safety and exposures on the farm, because we know a lot of you are working with chemicals from time to time, and that there is the potential for a lot of damage if you are not being properly protected when you are working with chemicals. One of the chemicals that we know that you have exposure to sometimes, and in a lot of our communities, a lot of it is used, and that's anhydrous ammonia. Well, we know that that can have an immediate dangerous effect in the human body if you don't have the proper eye protection, glove protection on, because it removes moisture from anything it comes in contact with immediately. And that includes your eyes. There are a couple demonstrations that sometimes teachers have done, educators in day camps have done. And if you take, for instance, take grapes and drop them in a container of anhydrous ammonia, within a second, they freeze solid. You pull those out of that anhydrous ammonia and they look like mush. So that's exactly what happened to your eyes if you've got anhydrous ammonia sprayed on them. The picture here that you see shows a dollar bill, average size, right? Dollar bill. Dipped in anhydrous ammonia for a second or two, it comes out looking like the dollar bill on the bottom. All of the moisture in that material that makes up that dollar bill has been sucked right out of it. So anhydrous ammonia sprayed in your eyes or rubbed in your eyes off your hands can cause immediate danger and have lasting effects. So we don't want you losing vision because your eyes aren't protected if you have anhydrous in your environment on your agricultural property. Hand protection. Hand protection is very important for a lot of reasons. When you're working with equipment, fencing, animals, you want to be wearing proper leather gloves. Make sure that they fit properly. We always worry about gloves being too tight. Well, there's also the problem of gloves being too large because our hands can slip out of them. If you turn and your hand slips out of your glove, you could cause an injury in a hurry. The other type of glove that you see here is that green glove, and that is a nitrile glove. It has protection against chemicals because of the material in it. And you want to make sure that when you buy gloves that you look at the labels, particularly if they're going to be exposed to chemicals. You want to make sure that the pesticide statement is on there as to whether it's waterproof or chemical resistant, because that makes a difference on which type of glove you want to use. A brief note, your glove size oftentimes is about the same measure as when you take a measurement and go around your hand, around your palm. And for instance, if your hand is 9 inches around, that'd be about a medium. If you have a small hand, like some of our young girls and women have, you might wear like a 5 or a 6, and that would mean that tape said 6 inches around, so you'd look for a smaller glove. So that's one way that you can measure what might be the right glove for you. But make sure that if you are working in agriculture that you have the right glove for the right exposure. If you're working with chemicals, we want to make sure that you wear unlined chemical-resistant gloves, and these are made out of neoprene or nitrile. You don't want to wear cotton, and you don't want to wear leather because they're made from natural materials, and leather is like your skin. It will absorb all that chemical. So those are reasons to avoid that type of material. The same thing for footwear. You want to make sure that you have PVC or neoprene boots, not leather boots, when you're out in areas where chemicals are being used or have recently been sprayed. Eye protection is important. We showed you a picture earlier of goggles with the indirect vents, and to make sure that they fit right so you have fog-free lenses on them. You may be in a situation where you'll want to have coveralls. We showed the picture of the young man with the white long suit on. That was the Tyvek suit. Not all chemicals need that type of protection. Sometimes just pants and a long sleeve shirt would be sufficient. But read the label. The label on chemicals is extremely important. It will tell you exactly what you're exposed to. It will tell you exactly what you need to wear for protection. So if the label says wear a respirator, then wear a respirator. When you're finished, whatever footwear you've had on, your boots that you've had on when you've been out in some place that has been sprayed or exposed to chemicals, get those boots off before you go inside the building. You don't want to track them into your home or into carpeted areas. One of the things we have to remember for those of you in school is there are age restrictions regarding pesticide applicators. So you really need to be aware, and you need to look at what the Worker Protection Standard from EPA has said. There are a lot of areas and a lot of types of chemicals where if you are under the age of 18, legally you cannot be using them or be exposed to the areas where they're being sprayed or being applied. So we want to really make sure that if you are working for an employer in your neighborhood or for a company, even temporarily, that you be sure that if you are exposed to those chemicals, that they are following all the EPA Worker Protection Standard regulations. Footwear is very important when it comes to working in agriculture, and we know that we should not be wearing leather shoes when we're around chemicals, and sometimes leather boots are exactly what we need to have on. All depends upon where you're working. If you are out in the barns and in the fields, well-worn foot protection may not have the right kind of traction on it. And we don't always pay attention to the bottom of our shoes. We don't always look at them when we put them on. We're so used to putting them on and going that every once in a while we need to take a look at that traction. And if you look at the two pictures here, the one picture on your left as you're looking at it has a poor grip. It can become a slipping hazard, where the boot on the right has a much better grip on it. And you can oftentimes, if you even take a coin and slide it in those little tracks, if part of the coin is buried in there, then you know you've got pretty good traction. If you can't get that buried in those little tracks, then it's time to look for a different pair of boots or shoes. One of the things that we like to caution against is wearing heels that have on boots like cowboy boots. There's a time and a place that they're absolutely necessary and should be worn. When you're working with horses, you're riding, you need your boots with that heel on it. But for other types of work in agriculture, a flat sole is the safest and the best type of shoe or boot to be wearing. So again, it all depends upon what type of work you're doing. So foot protection is very important. Another word on foot protection is make sure your shoelaces are always tied securely. It's easy when you're working for laces to come untied, become loose, and that makes a dangerous situation because they can get caught up in equipment, caught up in fences, caught on anything. You can step on it with your other foot and trip and fall. And the same thing goes for looking at your jeans, your pants that you have on when you're out in your work areas, because if they're torn and really frayed, it increases your risk of getting it caught or entangled in a piece of equipment or even on like barbed wire. In this picture, take a look at it. This is one of our agricultural families, and we would like you to look at this and see if you think, are they dressed appropriately for the type of work that they're doing? And yes, they are. I guess I would like to say maybe some of them should have some more sun-safe hats with wide brims on them, and that's a section that you'll be talking about later in one of our other segments. But yes, their jeans, their boots, their footwear is all appropriate, and it is as safe as we would like to see them be. So this is a pretty good picture of people dressed safely for farm and ranch work. In addition to shoelaces, we want to make sure that other strings and other potentials for entanglement are being reduced. Look at these sweatshirts, and the girl on the left, it's a little hard to see, but she has strings in her sweatshirt. What we highly recommend is that if you're doing farm work of any kind, that when you put your sweatshirt on, the first thing you do is get rid of the strings in it. And they are one of the reasons that we see a lot of entanglement injuries is the sweatshirt strings. When you lean over, lean up against something, it can get caught very quickly. And it will just rip not only the sweatshirt, but oftentimes damage your extremities. It can pull in your hair, all sorts of things like that. So we want to avoid that at all costs. It's another reason for keeping long hair tied up securely, either in a cap or in a bun on top of your head, because a long ponytail or long hair can easily get caught up in moving parts on equipment. And those injuries are not very pleasant to look at, I will tell you that. Here are some resources that we have available for protection that you can use as reference material. And on the back side of it, there will be the ability to write down the protective equipment that you think you would use in your particular exposures in your environment. Not everybody will be using the same thing based on what you do in your day's work or your activities out in the agricultural environments. This is another resource that has come in very handy for a lot of people, and we have this available to help you choose the right respiratory protection. And it will tell you what you will need for different exposures. If you would like more information, give us a call or give a hold of us on our website. We're the AgriSafe Network, And we're at agrisafe.org, and anytime you go on, you will see all the different information and materials that we have. And we would like to say that we love working with young people, and if you have any questions, please let us know.